A horse stops dead in the middle of the desert, ears pricked forward, as if hearing something a man hasn't caught yet. Then the sound arrives, low, dry. A moan, then another, then something that might be the voice of a child. The sun comes down from above, bounces back up from below, meets itself somewhere around shoulder height, in a way that feels personal. No insects, no birds, just red dirt and an older kind of silence. The kind that isn't empty but full of something without a name. Out here, the land never offers water freely, and the desert does not care who you are. 40 people, maybe more. Spilling forward like a fever dream? Not walking, but falling. Each step a negotiation with gravity they aren't sure they're winning. One man breaks from the group. A scar runs from his cheekbone down to his jaw. He doesn't beg, doesn't gesture. He only looks, measuring friend or threat. And above him, on the ridge of red stone, a weathered hand reaches slowly for a canteen. Gus Calloway had not spoken to another human being in 11 days. Not because he was angry at anyone. Not because something had happened. Just because there was nobody out there. Just the trail, the heat, the red dirt that got into everything. Your boots, your teeth. The creases around your eyes. 11 days of quiet. He didn't mind it. That was the thing nobody understood about Gus. People assumed a man alone was a man suffering. They'd look at him in towns. This weathered guy with the gray in his beard, and the careful way he ordered coffee, like he was measuring out each word before spending it. And they'd assume something was wrong. Nothing was wrong. He was 62 years old. His wife Eleanor had died 3 years ago, a Tuesday in March, quietly, the way she'd done most things. He had no children. He had a horse named Decker, who had opinions about everything and shared them freely. He had a ranch in northern Arizona that his grandfather Jacob had built with his own hands back when Arizona wasn't even a state yet, and he was going to sell it. That was the plan. Ride down through the Southern Territory one last time. See the land the way Jacob had seen it. Then go back, sign the papers. Let some cattle company from back east turn it into numbers on a ledger. Simple enough. Decker was 17 years old, gray at the muzzle. Solidly built and completely aware of his own dignity. He had carried Gus across hard country for over a decade, and he had never, not once, done anything dramatic about it. He simply walked. He simply endured. He simply kept going. Gus respected that in a horse. He respected it in people too, but people were harder to find. The Southern Arizona Territory in late summer was not a place that invited lingering. The heat came down from above and bounced back up from below and met itself somewhere around shoulder height in a way that felt personal. The red rocks held the warmth into the evening. The scrub grass stood rigid and pale. Water was the one thing the land never offered freely. Gus had been through this territory 4 times in his life. Each time he'd noted the same things. The way the light changed color as the afternoon deepened. The way the silence out here was different from other silences. Not empty, but full of something that didn't have a name. The way the horizon always looked reachable and never was. Jacob had loved this land. Gus had never quite understood that. He appreciated it the way you appreciate something that demands respect. Not warmly, but genuinely. The desert didn't care about you. That was actually restful, if you let it be. He'd been riding since before sunrise. The plan was to make the southern water post by nightfall, rest the horses, continue in the morning. He'd done this route before. He knew the landmarks. He knew the distances. He was thinking about none of this in particular. Half asleep in the saddle. The way you learn to sleep when you've been riding long enough, present enough to stay on, but absent enough to rest, when Decker stopped. It wasn't a gradual thing, not a slowing down, not a hesitation. Decker just stopped, full stop, like he'd walked into a wall only he could see. The sudden stillness snapped Gus back. He grabbed the reins, straightened up. What? Not a question. More like a statement directed at the horse. Decker's ears went forward, both of them, pointing like compass needles toward something ahead. His nostrils opened wide. His whole body had gone rigid in that way that meant not fear exactly, more like maximum attention. Like every system the animal had was suddenly, completely on. Gus had learned something over 40 years of riding. When your horse stops in open desert, you stop too. You don't ask questions first. You don't assume it's nothing. You stop. You look, you listen. He listened. The desert was quiet. Not the ordinary desert quiet. Something older. Something that meant whatever was coming had already decided to come. No insects, no birds, just heat and silence. And that faint, dry smell of the Arizona afternoon pressing down on everything like a hand. Then he heard it, a sound. Low. Almost nothing. Like something the wind was carrying from a long way off just to be cruel. A moan. Then another. Then something that might have been a child. Gus stepped down from the saddle. He didn't rush. Rushing in the desert was how you died. He tied Decker's reins to a rock. The horse wouldn't run. Decker never ran. But it was habit, and he climbed the nearest formation. Just a low ridge of red sandstone, maybe 15 feet up. He pressed his hat down against the glare, looked east, and for a moment he didn't understand what he was seeing. They moved like something from a fever dream. Not walking. Not exactly. More like falling forward. Controlled collapse. One step, then another. Like each footfall was a negotiation with gravity that they weren't sure they were winning. 40 people? Maybe. More strung out across 200 yards of open desert in the worst part of the afternoon. The Arizona summer sun. The real kind. The kind that doesn't feel like warmth anymore, pressing down like something with intent. Like something trying to push you into the ground. Women carrying babies who weren't moving, not crying. Just still. Children, whose lips were so cracked they'd bled and dried and cracked again. Old men with eyes that had gone somewhere else. Already somewhere else. That 1,000-yard stare that didn't mean they were looking far away. It meant they'd stopped expecting to see anything. And then one man separated from the group. He walked toward Gus's position. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Like he still had reserves that nobody else did. Like he'd decided somewhere at some point that he would be the last one standing no matter what it cost him. Tall. Broad through the shoulders despite everything. Hair gone gray at the temples. A scar running from his left cheekbone down to his jaw. Old, healed smooth. Something that had happened long ago and been survived. He stopped when he reached the base of the rock formation. He looked up at Gus, and he didn't say anything. That was the thing. That was what Gus would remember later. Not a plea, not a gesture, not a word. Just looking. The way you look at something when you're deciding what it is. Not begging, never begging, just measuring friend or threat. Opportunity or danger. Gus looked back, then he reached for his canteen. He climbed down and crossed the open space between them, and held the canteen out. The man took it. And here's the thing. Here's the thing Gus would think about later. Lying in his bedroll looking up at Arizona stars. The man took the canteen and he turned. Walked back toward the group, reached the nearest woman, old, barely standing. Feet wrapped in cloth that had worn through, and gave the water to her. She drank. He walked to a child. Maybe 4 years old, eyes closed, head lolling against his mother's shoulder. He put the canteen to the child's lips. The child drank. He moved through them like that. Calm, deliberate, not hurrying, because hurrying would be panic, and panic was contagious, and he couldn't afford that. 6 people. 7, 8. Each one given exactly as much as they needed, not more. He was the 11th person to drink. He handed the empty canteen back to Gus. Their eyes met. Gus understood, in that moment, what kind of man this was. You could spend a lifetime trying to become that. Some people never got there. Broken antler, the man said. His voice was rough, like water over gravel. 2 days of thirst in every syllable. He pressed his fist once to his chest. Gus understood. Gus, he said. Same gesture. The story came out in pieces. With signs. With the handful of shared words. With Sarah, the man's daughter, 24 years old. who'd learned English from a missionary teacher who died of fever 2 summers ago, translating the parts that couldn't be shown. Soldiers had come, government men with papers. The word from Washington? Relocation. A new territory, far north. They'd had 5 days to pack everything they owned. They had been walking for 3 weeks. Their guide had died on day 9. A fall, a broken leg. The desert does not wait for broken legs. The water had run out 2 days ago. Gus did the math fast. The way he always did math, not with paper, just in his head, running numbers the same way he ran fence lines. What he had, what they needed, what was possible. His canteen was empty. He had 2 more on Decker. 2 full canteens for 40-some people who hadn't had water in 2 days. It was not enough. Not close to enough. With the sun still high, the weakest among them, the babies, the oldest, they'd start going down within hours. He stood there for a moment, just stood there. And something rose up from somewhere below conscious thought. Not a plan, exactly. More like a memory with a direction attached to it, his grandfather Jacob's voice. Rough and warm and carrying that particular smell of pipe tobacco that had saturated every piece of furniture in the man's house. Late nights by the fire when Gus was 7, 8 years old. Too young to understand everything. Old enough to remember it, where the stone eagle spreads its wings, old Jacob would say, pulling on his pipe, looking at nothing in particular, the way old men do when they're actually looking at the past. When the sun is highest and the shadow points east, you walk 50 paces. Between the red rocks. Water, boy. Water where you'd never think to look for it. Gus had never needed that story. Until now. He turned slowly, scanning the horizon, looking for something he'd only ever seen in his grandfather's words. And there, maybe 2 miles east, a rock formation, standing up against the sky, and from this angle, from this exact angle, in this exact light, it looked like a bird, wings out, head tilted. A massive eagle carved by 10,000 years of wind and water, and frozen mid-flight in sandstone. His heart moved not fast. Gus was not a man whose heart moved fast. But it moved, it has to be, he thought, it has to. He turned to Broken Antler, pointed east, made the gesture hand to mouth. Drinking water, he said. Broken Antler's eyes changed, just slightly, the way a fire changes when you add something to it. Not wild, just more. Before Broken Antler could respond, a younger man stepped forward. He came from the edge of the group like he'd been waiting for a reason. 27 years old, maybe. Hard muscle under dark skin, but lean. The lean of someone who'd been eating less than they needed for weeks. He moved like something coiled. Everything about him, the set of his jaw, the angle of his shoulders, the position of his hands near his knife, said the same thing. I don't trust this. He spoke in Apache, fast, pointed, not to Gus. To Broken Antler Sarah, translated in a quiet voice. She didn't editorialize, just gave the words directly. He says the white men always know where the water is. He says they know because they poisoned the other sources to make us go where they want. He says this is a trap. Gus didn't look at the young man when she translated. Kept his eyes on Broken Antler. Because this wasn't a decision for the young man to make. The young man wasn't wrong to feel what he felt. He wasn't wrong to say it. But this was the chief's decision, and Broken Antler was the kind of man you looked at directly. The young man kept talking. Sarah kept translating. Flint says if we follow this man and there is no water, we will not have the strength to come back. He says we are betting everything on a stranger story. Broken Antler let Flint finish. Then he spoke, once. 3 words that Gus didn't understand. Flint went still, then he stepped back, 1 step. Face set like stone. Eyes moving to Gus and staying there, locked on. The message in those eyes was perfectly clear without any translation. I am watching you. 1 mistake. 1 Broken Antler turned to Gus. Then he did something unexpected. He almost smiled. Not quite, not all the way. But something moved at the corner of his mouth. Like a man who had seen enough of the world to find a certain grim humor in the situations it put you in. Walk, he said. The English word careful and exact, so they walked. Gus led Decker, didn't ride. Felt wrong to ride when 40 people were walking on blown-out feet. Decker walked beside him like a ship, big and steady, and the Apache followed. The sun was brutal. No other word for it. The light came from everywhere at once, straight down from above, bouncing back up off the pale sand, radiating out from the red rock faces they passed between. No shade. No mercy. A woman fell. Gus heard it before he saw it. The soft sound of knees hitting sand and then a voice, low, cut off by effort. He turned. Young woman. 20, maybe 22, on her knees, trying to get back up. Hands flat in the hot sand. Arms shaking. Before Gus could take a step, Flint was there. He moved fast, got his arms under her, lifted her without comment, without expression, settled her weight across his shoulders, the way you carry someone when you know how to do it. Distributed, balanced, efficient, and Gus saw it then. The tremor in Flint's legs. Just a slight one. He was near his limit too. Everyone was. But he'd picked her up anyway. You don't have to like someone to respect them. Gus turned back to the rock formation, still there. Getting closer 50 paces, Jacob had said. From the base. Follow the shadow. They reached the eagle formation an hour before the sun hit its highest point. The rock was enormous up close. What had looked like wings from 2 miles out resolved into 2 massive sandstone plains, tilting upward and outward, streaked red and orange, and a dark brown that was almost black in the shadows between them. The head, that tilted, watching shape, was a separate formation behind, taller, angled at just the right degree. From directly beneath it looked like nothing, just rock. But from the south, at midday, from the angle Gus had seen it, it was exactly what Jacob had described. He explained, with words in hands and Sarah's quiet translation, that they needed to wait. The sun wasn't quite overhead yet. The shadow wasn't in position. 20 minutes, maybe 30. Flint, who had set the young woman down under the scanty shade of the rock formation's edge and was now standing with his arms crossed, spoke. Sarah translated. He says every minute we wait, the children get weaker. Tell him I know, Gus said. Tell him I've got 2 canteens on the horse and he can give them out right now. And when the shadow moves, we find the water, or I deserve whatever he's thinking about doing to me. Sarah blinked, then she almost smiled. She translated. Flint's expression didn't change. But his eyes did, just fractionally. Like he'd recalculated something. He looked at the canteens on Decker. Looked at Gus. Walked to the horse, removed both canteens without asking, and started moving through the group. Gus watched him work. The same way Broken Antler had worked with the first canteen. Children first. Then the oldest, then the mothers with babies. Flint knew exactly who needed it most without having to be told. He'd been paying attention to his people every minute of this. The babies got water on their lips first. One of them, tiny, maybe 6 months old, lips blue at the edges, coughed, weakly, then cried. The thinnest, most exhausted cry Gus had ever heard, and it was the best sound he'd heard in years. 23 minutes later, the shadow moved into position. Gus had been watching it. The way the angled sunlight crept across the sand, the shadow of the eagle's head shifting slowly, swinging east like the hour hand of a clock, built by God and set running 10,000 years ago. He watched it settle. Pointed east, he walked to the base of the rock formation, where the shadow originated. Started counting 1, 2, 3. He walked slow, measured steps. The way his grandfather had probably walked this same line 30-something years ago. 40, 45, 50. He stopped. In front of him, sand, rocks. The same desert that stretched in every direction. Nothing special. Nothing obvious. The group had gone quiet. Flint's eyes were on him. Gus got down on his knees. He started digging with his hands. Sand first. Loose, hot, easy to move. Then compacted sand. Then something different. His fingers found the edge of something that wasn't natural. Flat, too regular, stone. But shaped. Someone cut this. He dug faster. Help me, he said. Broken Antler was there immediately. Then 2 other men. Then flint. After a half-second's hesitation that cost him something. You could see it cost him something. They dug, they moved stones. Big ones. Heavy. 3 men to each that had been placed deliberately. Sealed deliberately. This wasn't erosion. This wasn't geological chance. Someone had hidden this. Someone had wanted it to be found again. The last stone moved. And from below, from the darkness between the rocks, a sound soft at first. A murmur. A gurgle. Then water. Clear, cold water, welling up from below the desert floor, filling the cavity between the stones, spreading. The sound it made, Gus would never find the right word for what followed. 40 people who had been quiet for so long. Conserving everything, spending nothing, suddenly had nothing left to conserve. The noise was enormous and human and raw, crying and laughing and calling out in Apache. Mothers carrying children to the water's edge and cupping it in their hands. Old men lowering themselves to their knees and pressing their faces to the cold surface. Gus stepped back, gave them room. He stood a little apart and watched and felt something move through him that he hadn't felt in a long time. Not pride, not quite, more like purpose. Like this was the thing he had ridden 11 days to do without knowing it. He was about to sit down on a nearby rock when he saw it on the rock face to his left. Behind where the sealed stones had been, exposed now that the rocks were moved, letters. Carved. Deep and deliberate. The kind of carving a man does when he means for it to last. J. Calloway, 1847. Gus stared at it, his grandfather's handwriting. He recognized it from the old letters, the ledger books, the deed to the ranch with Jacob's signature at the bottom. J. Calloway. 1847. 37 years ago. He wasn't the first Calloway to stand in this spot. He wasn't the first to find this water. Something had shifted. The ground under the story he thought he knew about himself, about his grandfather, about why he was here. He stood there with his hand on the carved letters and felt the shift the way you feel the ground move. Subtle. Undeniable. This isn't a coincidence, he thought. This was never a coincidence. They camped that night at the water. Broken antlers people set up quickly, efficiently. They'd been doing it every night for 3 weeks, and they were practiced at it now, even half dead from thirst. Fires in the sheltered spaces between rocks. Bedrolls arranged. Children already asleep before full dark. Exhausted into something that finally looked like peace. Gus made his own small fire at the edge of things. Not too close, not too far. He ate, drank. Looked at the stars. Arizona stars were different from anywhere else. He'd decided this at age 8 and never had any reason to revise it. The sky here was too big and too dark and too clear, and the stars came out so thick that you couldn't always find the constellations because there were too many other stars in the way. Eleanor had loved them. You're doing that thing, she would have said, if she were here, which she wasn't, which he was still 3 years later, on a daily basis, not entirely adjusted to. What thing? The quiet, sad thing. Stop it. I'm not sad. Gus, I'm reflective. That's what sad people say when they don't want to admit it. He almost smiled. He reached into the side pocket of Decker's left saddlebag. The old one, the original leather, cracked and dark with age. To get his folding knife to cut some jerky, his fingers found something that wasn't jerky. He pulled it out, a packet, flat and thin, wrapped in oilskin that had dried to stiffness over. How long? The leather was old. The oldest piece of tack he still used because Jacob had given it to him specifically, had pressed it into his hands the summer, before he died and said, "That bag was made to last, boy. Don't replace it." He hadn't replaced it. He turned the packet over. The oilskin was stitched closed. Careful stitching, deliberate. He took out his knife, cut the thread along the edge, inside paper, old paper, tanned golden brown at the edges, folded 3 times. He unfolded it carefully, Jacob's handwriting. He read by firelight. He read slowly because the writing was cramped in places, and the paper was fragile at the folds. He read the whole thing twice before he let himself think about what he was reading. Jacob Calloway. His grandfather had spent the winter of 1846 to 1847 in this territory. Trapping, mostly, trading. Living the way men in those years lived when they went far enough out. He had met an Apache woman named Morning Frost. He had stayed through spring. He had left. I did not go back, Jacob wrote. The ink darker there pressed harder. I have told myself many reasons why. None of them are good enough. She was with child when I left. I knew it. I chose not to know it. That is the truth, and I am ashamed of it, and there is no fixing it now. I sealed the water source and marked it, so that whoever came back, her people, my people, whoever found it, would know there had been something here worth protecting. If anyone reads this who knows her or who comes from her, understand that I was not a good man in this. I tried to be good in other things. In this one thing I failed. Gus folded the paper. Held it for a long time. Somewhere in this group of 40 people, there might be someone who came from that, from Jacob, from Morning Frost, from that winter of 1846. He didn't know what that meant yet. He needed to sleep on it. He didn't sleep. By morning, the camp had fully recovered its humanity. That was the only way to put it. The people who had walked in like ghosts, barely present, bodies ahead of their souls, had become people again overnight. Water did that. Sleep did that. Children ran between the rocks in the early light, not far, not reckless, but running, which they hadn't been doing yesterday. The women had organized the cooking fire with a quiet efficiency that spoke of deep habit. The smell of something warm and spiced drifted across the camp. Broken Antler found Gus at his fire, sat down across from him without asking, which was fine. It was his territory. He had a strip of dried meat and he held it out. Gus took it. They ate in silence for a minute that felt comfortable rather than awkward. Then Broken Antler spoke. Sarah appeared beside him. Gus hadn't heard her come. She moved quietly, an unsettling amount of quietly for someone he needed to stop being unsettled by, and translated. He says you slept poorly. Tell him it's a habit. She translated. Broken Antler listened, said something short. He says it is a bad habit for a man to carry alone. Gus looked at the fire. Yeah, he said. I know. A longer silence. The good kind. Then Broken Antler said something else. More words this time. Something that required Sarah to listen fully before she began. He says tonight there will be a council. He says you must come. He says the tribe owes you a debt that must be paid, because an unpaid debt of life is a kind of wound that doesn't close. He says he will offer you the payment that honor requires. What? Payment. She glanced at her father. He says you'll see tonight. The council tent was larger than it looked from outside. The interior was lit by low fires in clay bowls. The smoke channeled up and out through a gap at the peak. Broken Antler sat at the center. 6 elders arranged around him in a loose semicircle. 2 younger warriors at the entrance, not hostile, just present. Flint stood against the far wall, arms crossed, face still. Eyes on Gus from the moment he entered, and then the tent flap opened again. The women came in, one by one, 22 of them. They arranged themselves in a line to one side, and they were, Gus noticed this with a particular kind of discomfort, dressed carefully. Their best, turquoise jewelry, beaded work, hair arranged. Not for a ceremony that was about them. For one that was about something being decided for them. He counted them, 22. Then he saw Sarah. She came in last. She took her place in the line, but she was the only one whose chin was up. The only one whose eyes were moving actively, deliberately moving. Taking in the room, noting the positions of people, reading it the way someone reads a document they've been handed without warning and need to understand quickly. She found Gus, held his gaze for one moment, then looked away. Broken Antler spoke. Sarah did not translate this time. One of the elders did, an older man with careful English, the measured kind that comes from learning it late. You have saved 41 lives. In our tradition, a debt of life cannot be left unpaid. It is a wound in the world. It must be closed. Chief Broken Antler offers you in gratitude and in honor the unmarried women of this tribe, all of them. They are willing. They will care for your home, give you children, make your life full. Silence, his daughter, the elder continued, is included in this gift. She is the greatest treasure he has to offer. Gus didn't speak right away. He took a moment, because what you said next, in a moment like this to people like this, it matched. It had weight. Words here were not casual things. And in that moment before he spoke, the sound in the tent shifted. A voice, clear, not loud, but absolutely precise, Sarah's voice. I am not a gift, in English, directed somehow, everywhere and nowhere at once. Her father, the elders, Gus, the room itself. I am not a gift for anyone to give. Broken Antler turned to look at his daughter. The expression on his face was complicated. Not anger, not quite. More like, he had expected this. Like he'd known she would say it, and had decided to let it land before responding. Gus looked at Sarah. She looked back at him. He said, I know, 2 words. Quiet. No performance. Something shifted in her eyes. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected argument, or discomfort, or the reflexive politeness of a man trying to talk around an uncomfortable truth. She hadn't expected agreement. She looked away again. Flint, across the room, had gone very still. His hands were no longer near his knife. They were at his sides, fists. The stillness of a man doing everything he cannot to show what his body already knows. Gus read it in a second, and understood something that nobody had told him. Oh, he thought, oh, I see. He looked at Flint. Flint looked back. Gus made a decision. He turned to the elder who was translating. Tell the chief that I'm grateful. Tell him the honor he's doing me is more than I deserve. Tell him I can't give him an answer tonight. I need to sleep on it. One night the elder translated. Broken Antler listened. His face gave nothing away. Then he spoke. He says you have until sunrise, the elder said. But understand, the debt must be paid. If you refuse this gift, you must offer another form of payment. The honor of the tribe requires it. I understand, Gus said. He looked once more at Sarah, at Flint, put it together. Then he walked out of the tent into the Arizona night. Flint was behind him. Before he'd gone 20 feet, he didn't announce himself. Didn't need to. Gus stopped walking. Turned around. They looked at each other in the dark. The fires of the camp behind Flint throwing his shadow forward, long and irregular. Your English, Gus said. Is it good enough for this conversation? A pause. Then, from Flint. Good enough. He'd known. Of course he'd known. You don't hide something that useful, unless you have reasons to hide it. And Flint had reasons for everything. How long, Gus said. Not a question exactly. Since we were children, Flint said. Her and me, Gus nodded. And your uncle knows? He knows, but he still offered her. Flint's jaw worked. He believes in the old ways. A debt of life is sacred. He is offering the most valuable thing he has, a beat. That is her. Gus looked at the stars for a moment. Eleanor's stars. I'm not taking her, he said, or any of them. Flint stared. I'm serious, Gus said, but I have a problem. Your uncle says the debt has to be paid. If I refuse the women, I have to offer something else. I don't know your customs well enough to know what. Silence from Flint. Long enough that Gus wasn't sure he was going to answer. Then, there is another way, old way. If he refuses a gift of honor, he can prove his worth through trials. 3 of them. Skill, patience, endurance. If he passes, he earns the right to propose his own settlement of the debt. And if he fails? Flint almost smiled. It wasn't friendly, exactly. But it was honest. Then we have a different problem. Gus nodded slowly. All right, he said. 3 trials. He extended his hand. Flint looked at it. Looked at Gus. Some calculation happening behind those dark eyes. Then he took it. One firm shake. I will tell my uncle in the morning, Flint said. He turned to go. Flint. He stopped. She's not a treasure to be given, Gus said. She's a person. Your uncle knows that. He's working with the tools he has. Flint stood with his back to Gus for a long moment. I know what she is, he said quietly. Then he walked back toward the fires. Gus stood in the dark, looked up at the stars. Eleanor, he thought. You would have had something to say about all of this. He could almost hear her. I would have said, Took you long enough to be interesting. He almost laughed, didn't quite, but almost. In the morning, before the council was reconvened, before anything else, Gus found the carving again. Calloway, 1847. He put his hand on it, 37 years of desert weather, and it was still clear. Jacob had cut it deep. Jacob had meant for it to be here for a long time. Gus thought about the journal pages. Morning frost, a child. The winter of 1846, somewhere in this camp, maybe, there was blood that connected to his. He didn't know what to do with that yet. He didn't know what it changed. But he knew he wasn't leaving. Not yet, not until he understood what his grandfather had left here, besides a name on a rock. He turned from the carving and walked back toward the camp. The sun was coming up, red and orange and huge, the way it only came up out here, painting everything the color of something that had been burning for a long time. The trials would start today, whatever happened next. Whatever Flint's uncle decided, whatever these 3 challenges turned out to be. Gus Calloway was staying one day, one thing at a time, the way his grandfather would have done it, the way Eleanor would have told him to. The first trial was announced at sunrise. Broken Antler stood at the center of camp, with the early light behind him. Red and long and cutting across the desert floor like something with an edge. He spoke in Apache. One of the elders translated for Gus 3 trials, 3 days. Starting now. First trial, a race, on horseback. Through the boulder field east of camp, around the twin spires Gus had noticed on the horizon and back. First man across the line at camp's edge. Gus's opponent, Flint, who was already standing beside his horse. The horse was something, a pinto. Young, maybe 4 years old, with the electric quality of an animal that hasn't yet learned its own limits. It danced sideways, through its head. Flint steadied it with one hand and didn't look at Gus. Decker stood next to Gus like a monument. 17 years old, gray at the muzzle, solidly built and aware of his own dignity. Gus looked at Decker. Decker looked at the pinto. Then Decker looked at Gus, with the expression of a very experienced employee who has been asked to race someone, half his age, and has opinions about this. "I know," Gus said quietly. He mounted up. The boulder field was not a friendly place. That was the point, obviously. The course didn't go around the hard terrain. It went straight through it. Loose shale that shifted under hooves. Rocks that looked stable and weren't. Sudden drops masked by morning shadow. The kind of ground where a confident horse moved slower than a careful one, or was supposed to. Broken Antler raised his arm. The camp went quiet. That held breath quiet of people who have something to lose on the outcome. The arm dropped. Flint's pinto exploded. That was the only word for it. 0 to full speed in the time it took Gus to process that the race had started. The young horse's stride was enormous, consuming ground, eating up the distance between the camp edge and the boulder field in seconds. Decker moved, smooth, powerful, but not panicked. By the time they hit the first rocks, Flint had 3 lengths on him. Gus didn't push. This was the thing about 40 years on horseback. You learned what desperation cost you. You learned that chasing usually meant losing. You learned that the race wasn't about the first 100 yards. The boulder field opened up in front of them, shale and sandstone and ancient cracked granite. The pinto hit it fast, too fast. Flint was good. He adjusted, shifted his weight, guided with his knees. But fast through rock meant constant correction. Constant correction meant energy spent. Decker picked his way, not slow, not careful in a timid way, more like deliberate, each footfall chosen. Each line through the rocks selected 2 steps ahead, not because Gus was steering him, because Decker had been doing this for 17 years and had his own ideas about how to cross rocky ground without dying. The gap closed, not dramatically, not in a movie way, inch by inch. The pinto had to check itself twice at sudden drops that Decker had already read and angled around. Flint leaned back, leaned forward, worked constantly. Gus sat easy. By the time they cleared the boulders and opened into the flat ground approaching the twin spires, They were even, side by side. Gus could see Flint in his peripheral vision, and he didn't look over, because looking over was for people who weren't sure. He was sure. Well, fairly sure. Decker, he thought. Come on, old man. Decker did not appear to hear this. Or perhaps he heard it and filed it under. Already handling it, they rounded the twin spires together. Now the run back. A mile of mixed terrain. The boulder field again, then open sand, then the camp. And that's when Gus heard it. A change in Flint's horse's rhythm, subtle. Just a slight irregularity on the right foreleg. A fraction of a second's hesitation. Not dramatic, not a stumble. But there, he'd stepped wrong somewhere in the rocks. Not serious, probably. But enough, Gus had a choice. He could push, right now. Lean into Decker, ask for everything. And in the next 30 seconds, he would be ahead and staying there. The Pinto couldn't match Decker's pace with a tender foreleg. He could win this cleanly, and nobody could argue. He sat back instead. Pulled the smallest amount of rein. Decker slowed, fractionally, matching Flint's adjusted pace. What are you doing? Gus thought to himself. What are you doing? Because he knew what he was doing. He just wasn't sure it was smart. They came back through the boulder field side by side. Back onto open sand. The camp visible ahead, broken antlers standing still at the finish line. Sarah somewhere in the group, not moving. Gus held Decker back all the way to the line. They crossed it together. Silence. Then Flint pulled up his horse. Dismounted. And before Gus had even fully stopped, Flint was crouching at his horse's foreleg. Running his hand down it, feeling, he looked up at Gus. Something passed between them that had no language. Flint stood. He turned to his uncle. He spoke in Apache, short. Declarative, the elder translated. Flint says the stranger won. He saw the horse was hurt and chose not to take advantage. He says this is not weakness. He says this is something else. Broken Antler looked at Gus for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once. First trial is complete, the elder said. Rest. Tomorrow the second. Slid off Decker. Ran his hand along the horse's neck. Good, he said. Decker huffed, which Gus chose to interpret as, I know, you're welcome. That evening, Gus sat alone near the water source. The sound of it was something. Underground water, finding moons up through ancient rock, spreading across the cavity they'd opened, filling a shallow stone basin that the women had cleared of sediment during the day. Clean. Cold. Constant. His grandfather had found this or known about it. Or been shown. He pulled the journal pages out again. Read them again, not because the words had changed, but because he was looking for something he might have missed the first time. Some detail. Some name beyond morning frost. Some indication of whether a child had actually been born, whether the child had survived, whether 37 years later there was anyone alive who carried Jacob Calloway's blood in Apache skin. The pages didn't give him more than they had. I chose not to know it. That line again. He read the name one more time. Morning Frost. He didn't know why it landed the way it did. Just a name. Just 2 words on old paper, but something about it felt like a door that had been closed a long time, and was now quietly open. Gus thought about his own choices, the ones he'd made well, the ones he hadn't. Eleanor saying once, not unkindly, she was rarely unkind, "You have a talent for doing the right thing too late, Gus." Working on it, he'd said. I know, she'd said. That's why I married you. The fire had burned down to coals by the time he heard footsteps. He didn't turn around. You read it again, Sarah said. She sat down across the fire from him. Not close, not far. The exact distance of someone who is choosing to be present without presuming. How do you know I read it again? Because you have the same expression my father gets when he reads something that costs him. Gus looked at her. She was looking at the fire. Sarah, the woman in these pages. Morning Frost. He paused. Do you know that name? She went still. Not the stillness of surprise, the other kind. The kind of stillness that means a person already knows what's coming and is deciding how much to give. Why do you ask? Because Jacob Calloway, my grandfather, writes about her. About a child. The fire between them crackled. A log shifted, sent a small shower of sparks upward orange against the dark. Sarah was quiet for long enough that Gus thought she might not answer. Then, Morning Frost was my grandmother. The world didn't do anything dramatic. No thunder, no sudden wind, just the fire, and the water, and the Arizona night doing what Arizona nights did, being enormous and quiet and indifferent to human revelation. Your grandmother. Gus said she died before I was born. My father's mother. A pause. He never spoke of his father. Not once. It was an absence. In the shape of something that should have been there. Gus looked at the journal pages in his hands. There's something you should probably read, he said. I know, she said. That's why I came. He gave her the pages. She read them without expression. Or rather, with an expression that was doing a great deal of work to remain composed, and was, for the most part, succeeding. She read slowly, carefully. When she finished, she held the pages without moving for a long time. Then she set them down, carefully, between them. He knew she said, yes, and he left anyway. Yes, another silence. Does that? Gus started. It changes things, she said. Not harshly, just honestly. It changes what my father has always not known. That is, a large thing to change. I know, he will need to read this, I know. I'm trying to figure out the right moment. She looked up at him then, really looked. The way she'd looked at him in the council tent. That reading a document, look, there is no right moment for a thing like this, she said. There is only the moment when it is time. And sometimes you have to decide that the moment is now. She stood up. Sarah, she stopped. Flint, no? About any of this? For just a moment, her composure did something. Just at the edges. Flint knows everything about me, she said. Everything that matters. She walked back toward the fires. Gus sat with the sound of the water for a long time after. Day 3. Second trial, find the white deer. That was all the instructions were. Find the white deer of the Eastern Valley. Don't harm it. Don't drive it. Bring back proof of contact. The elder who explained this handed Gus a piece of red cloth. Small. Palm-sized. Tie it to the animal, the elder said. That is proof. How? The elder smiled for the first time. That is the trial. Gus set out alone at first light, with 2 hours of water, and the piece of cloth folded in his breast pocket. The Eastern Valley spread out below the camp, a wide, shallow basin between rock formations. Dry grass along the floor, scrub at the edges. Theoretically, a deer could be anywhere in there. Practically, he had no idea. He spent the first 2 hours moving through the valley the wrong way. Tracking, moving from sign to sign. Fresh hoof prints, grazed grass. The scattered remains of what a deer had eaten. Every trail led to the same place. Open ground, nothing. Because of course it did. You couldn't track an animal that could hear you from 200 yards and had been running from predators for its entire life. He wasn't faster than a deer. He wasn't quieter than a deer. He was a 62-year-old man in boots that were not designed for silent movement. He sat down on a rock, took off his hat, looked at the sky. Think, he said, to himself, out loud, because sometimes you needed to hear the instruction. Don't chase it. Think about where it goes. Jacob had taken him hunting once when Gus was 11. The old man had sat down in the same spot for 4 hours. Just sat. Young Gus, fidgeting, full of 11-year-old urgency, had asked 3 times why they weren't moving. Because I already know where the deer is going, Jacob had said. Now I'm waiting for it to get there. Gus looked at the valley. The morning was ending. The heat was rising. Where did a deer go when the morning's feeding was done and the sun was climbing? Shade, water, cool. And in this valley, where was the coolest, most shaded, most likely to have a seep of water? He looked east, at the far edge, where 2 rock formations came together in a narrow angle that would hold shadow well into midday. And at the base of that angle, the dark suggestion of something wet. A seep. Just a wet patch in the rock, really. Not enough to call water, but enough. He moved to a position upwind of it. Found a place where a low shelf of rock gave him something to lean against. Invisible from the front, he sat down, he waited. The sun moved slow, brutal. A hawk made a long, lazy circle overhead. Gus stayed still. Completely still. The kind of still that hurts after a while, that asks things of your joints, and your patience, and your willingness to be uncomfortable without moving in response. He thought about Eleanor. He thought about the ranch. He thought about Jacob kneeling on this same desert floor 37 years ago, building something that was meant to last, leaving his name on it, leaving his words in oilskin in a saddlebag that eventually came to Gus, as if the old man had known, as if he'd arranged it. Don't be dramatic, Eleanor would have said. What if he did arrange it? People don't arrange things from beyond the grave. Gus, Jacob might have. Jacob was a complicated man who made complicated choices, and you have romanticized him for 62 years. He built the ranch. He also left a woman pregnant and never went back. Yes, complicated, Gus agreed. In his head, to his dead wife, in the middle of the Arizona desert waiting for a white deer, he almost smiled. Then the deer appeared. It came from the north, moving south along the rock face. And it was something. Cream white coat with gray dappling along the spine. Rack on him because it was a buck, like something architectural. Deliberate. Each tine placed exactly right, moving the way things move when they don't know they're watched. Easy, unhurried. Gus did not move. Did not breathe differently. The deer moved toward the seep, lowered his head, drank. Or did what deer do at a seep, pressed his nose to the wet rock and worked at it. Gus waited. The deer raised his head, looked around. Looked in Gus's direction. This was the moment. The animal had caught something. Not scent. Gus was upwind. Not sound. Gus wasn't making any. But something. That sixth thing that prey animals have. The awareness of being looked at. Gus made a decision. He started talking. Not words, exactly. Just sound. Low, steady. A murmur with no particular content. The sound of something that wasn't threatening. The sound of presence without aggression. He'd done it with horses his whole life. With Decker specifically, when the horse was spooked, when the horse needed to be reminded that whatever was happening wasn't worth running from. The deer didn't run. It stood. Its ears rotated. Forward, sideways, trying to triangulate. Its nostrils flared. Everything about it was primed to flee. But it stood. Gus kept murmuring. And slowly, very slowly, he reached into his breast pocket and withdrew the red cloth. He extended his hand, flat palm. Red cloth draped across it. The deer looked at his hand, looked at Gus, looked at his hand. Gus was aware that this was, objectively, a ridiculous situation. 62-year-old cowboy, lying in the Arizona dirt, talking nonsense to a deer, while trying to tie a piece of cloth to its antler. And yet the deer took one step forward, then another. Then it was close enough that Gus could see the individual hairs along its muzzle. Could see its eye, dark, deep, full of that deer intelligence that looked simple from a distance and wasn't. It lowered its head. Gus reached up, and with hands that were absolutely, genuinely shaking, not from fear, from the wonder that comes when the impossible decides to happen anyway. He looped the red cloth around the base of the nearest tine and tied it. Simple, not tight enough to hold. The deer lifted its head, looked at Gus from about 8 inches away. Then it turned and walked back into the valley the same way it had come. Unhurried, like this had been part of its plan all along. Gus lay back on the desert floor, stared at the sky. Eleanor, he thought. You would have paid money to see that. He was back in camp by mid-afternoon. The scouts confirmed it within the hour. 2 young men who'd been watching from high ground. Standard practice, Flint explained later. Reported seeing the white deer moving through the valley with something red at its antler. The elder announced this to the council, and for the first time, the camp made noise about Gus. Not loud, not celebration exactly. More like an exhale. A collective exhale of people who had been holding something uncertain and were beginning to put it down. Broken antler said nothing. But he watched Gus across the fire that evening, with the same measuring look he'd used the very first time. Except now it was measuring different things. Flint sat down next to Gus, uninvited, which at this point meant something. They sat in silence for a while. 2 down, Gus said. 2 down, Flint agreed. The third, tomorrow, and that one's against you, yes. Gus looked at his hands. 62-year-old hands, scared across the knuckles. The kind of hands that had done a lot of things over a lot of years. I'm 35 years older than you, he said. I know. You could end this in 10 minutes if you wanted to. Flint was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said, I could. The fire between them settled. A log broke. Sparks. Will you? Flint looked at him. No. Why not? A pause long enough that Gus thought he wouldn't answer. Because an easy win proves nothing, Flint said. And I need to prove something. To who? To my uncle. To the tribe. To myself. Gus nodded. They sat in silence a while longer. The kind that meant something had been decided between 2 people without either of them announcing it. Flint. There's something you should know before tomorrow. About the journal. About my grandfather. Flint looked at him. Sarah told me. He said of course she had. And? Flint was quiet for a long time, and he said finally, I think your grandfather was a coward. But I think you are not. And I think those are 2 different things. A pause. And I think Broken Antler needs to read what is in that journal. But not yet. Not until after tomorrow. Why not until after? Because right now he sees you as a stranger he owes a debt to. After tomorrow, if you pass the 3rd trial, he will see you differently. And what a man reads changes, depending on what he already believes about the person who wrote it. Gus looked at him. 27 years old. Angry at the world in that way of young men who have watched too much injustice and had too little power to stop it. And underneath that anger, you're smarter than you let on, Gus said. Most people are, Flint said. You just have to give them a reason to stop hiding it. He stood up. Sleep, he said. You need it more than I do. He walked away, he looked up at the stars, stayed with the thought for a moment, then let it settle. He didn't sleep well, not because he was anxious about the trial, more because the desert had turned on him in the small hours of the morning, in the way it sometimes did. Temperature dropping 20 degrees, a wind picking up from nowhere, the sky going from stars to thick cloud in what felt like 10 minutes. He was wrapped in his bedroll, near the water source, away from the main camp by habit. He'd always slept better with a little space around him. The clouds killed the starlight. The dark became the absolute kind. He heard Decker shift. The horse's weight moving. One hoof, then another. Not alarm exactly. More like unease. Gus was half asleep, half listening, which was how he'd always slept in open country. One part of him always monitoring, then he felt it, against his ankle. The outside of his left boot. Something firm. Moving. He was awake in a fraction of a second. The kind of awake that bypasses all intermediate stages. Direct from half sleep to complete and total clarity. Because he knew exactly what that felt like. Don't move. Don't move. Do not. The rattle. Small. Dry. The sound of a diamondback that has decided it has been patient long enough. His entire body did the thing bodies do in that moment. A full system surge of something that was too immediate to be called fear. More like every cell simultaneously receiving the same message. This is very bad. He lay perfectly still. The snake was against the outside of his boot, between his foot and the bedroll's edge. Probably had been there for warmth. He'd moved in his sleep and disturbed it. Don't move, except. He needed to move. His hand was 6 inches from his bedroll edge, and if he could, just slowly, reach for the knife at his belt, he could. The snake moved. One rapid motion. The strike was. Fast was the wrong word. There was no right word. You didn't experience it as fast. You experienced it as before, then after. Before. His ankle untouched. After his ankle, with 2 points of fire in it. And then, between the before and the after, something else. A shape in the dark. Fast and decisive and coming from his left. A hand coming down hard on the snake just behind the head, pinning it. Another hand taking the body. And then the snake was removed from his vicinity with complete authority. Gus lay there. He'd been bitten. He knew it. The fire was spreading up his calf. A voice in the dark. Don't move. Flint, not a question of how or why. Just, Flint, my ankle, Gus said. I know, already moving. The sound of his pack being opened. I saw it go in before I could stop it. Hold still, a match struck. Small light. Enough. Flint's face in the matchlight. Focused. No panic. The calm of someone who has already decided panic is not an option. He looked at the bite. 2 punctures. Outside of the left ankle, just above the boot line. Already swelling. This is going to be unpleasant, Flint said. More or less unpleasant than losing the trial tomorrow. Gus said. Because apparently he made jokes in near-death situations. Good to know. Flint looked at him with an expression that was possibly the closest thing to warmth Gus had yet seen on that face. About the same, he said. Then he did what needed to be done. Fast and methodical. Without being asked. Without discussion. Gus didn't watch directly, turned his head, looked at the dark sky. Because letting someone do what Flint was doing to your ankle required a kind of compartmentalization that was easier with your eyes elsewhere. It hurt. Substantially. He breathed through it. Flint worked. After, he wrapped the ankle with something from his pack. Applied something else. A paste that smelled of sage and something bitter. Gus cut and wrapped it again. Elevated, he said. Positioning Gus's foot on his own pack. Thank you, sleep. I'm not going to. Sleep. Gus closed his eyes. And here is the thing. Here is the thing that Gus would carry from that night for the rest of his life. When he opened them briefly once, an hour later, Flint was still there, sitting upright, awake. Watching the perimeter of Gus's small camp in the dark, not because anyone had told him to. Not because anyone was watching. Just because he had decided that this was where he needed to be. And he stayed there until dawn. Gus woke to birds. The first birds he'd heard, since before the camp. They were back now. The desert's ordinary sounds returned. Which meant the extraordinary weather of the night had broken. He lay still for a moment. Took stock. His ankle, swollen, stiff, sore in the way of snakebite recovery, which he'd experienced once before, 20 years ago, enough to know that serious and dead were different categories, and this was the former. Not the latter. He sat up. Flint was asleep. Head dropped forward, sitting upright, arms around his knees, completely dead to the world, exhausted. He'd stayed all night. Gus looked at him for a moment. This young man who had wanted him dead 4 days ago, who had stood in the desert with murder in his eyes and a hand on his knife, who had last night, without a word of explanation, decided that Gus Calloway's life was worth losing sleep over. Complicated, Eleanor would have said. Most things are, Gus thought back. He stood, tested the ankle. It held. Not well, but enough. He found water, made fire, had coffee going by the time the camp started to wake. Flint's eyes opened. He looked at Gus standing at the fire. Then he looked at the position of the sun. You should not be standing, he said. I'm fine. You are not fine. I'm fine enough. Flint got to his feet. Looked at Gus's ankle. Looked at Gus's face. The third trial, he said. Still happening. Gus said, I didn't come this far to quit on a snake bite. Gus handed him a cup of coffee. Now drink this. You've been up all night. Flint took the cup. Looked at it.
Yeah.
You made coffee. It's the first thing I do every morning. I've done it since I was 19 years old. A diamondback is not going to change that. Flint drank. Something on his face, not softness exactly. More like a recalibration. The expression of someone updating a previously held belief in real time. You're very stubborn, Flint said. I've been told my uncle is going to refuse the trial. Then you'll have to help me convince him. A pause. Why would I do that? Because, Gus said. I think you've already decided which side you're on. And it's not the side where Gus Calloway goes home and nothing changes. Flint was quiet. Then he finished his coffee. Stood up. I will talk to my uncle, he said. He handed the cup back. But you are not fine, he said. Don't pretend otherwise. I never said fine, Gus said. I said fine enough. Broken Antler's reaction to the news of the snakebite was exactly what Flint had predicted. Refusal, absolute and immediate. The elder who translated didn't soften it. He says this is not something to prove. He says the trial can wait. Gus stood in front of the council, ankle wrapped, standing straight. The kind of straight that costs something. Tell him I understand. And tell him, I'm asking for the trial to produce blah and bled. Broken Antler listened. Spoke. He says you will be hurt worse in the trial. Probably. Gus agreed. He says this is not wisdom. Tell him, Gus said, that I know his daughter read the journal. Tell him I know she plans to show it to him. And tell him I would like him to read it after the trial, not before, because I want him to see me clearly first. Not through what his father was. Silence fell over the council like something physical. Broken Antler had gone very still. He looked at Gus, then he spoke. 3 words. The elder translated. He says, begin the trial. The combat ground was a flat area near the camp edge. Sand. No shade. Full sun. Of course full sun, because nothing about any of this was going to be comfortable. The rules. Endurance. No weapons. No striking that could cause permanent injury. No yielding until you couldn't continue. The goal was not to win. The goal was not to quit. Gus stood on one side, Flint on the other. They looked at each other. Flint's eyes said, I don't want to hurt you. Gus's eyes said, I know, do it anyway. Broken Antler gave the signal. The first 20 minutes were educational. That was the kindest word for them. Flint was fast. Faster than he'd looked standing still, which was already pretty fast. The first move came before Gus had fully settled his weight and caught him across the shoulder. Not a damaging blow, but enough to send a message about the gap in their speeds. Macho received. Gus adjusted. He'd fought before. Not cleanly. Not with any particular style. The kind of fighting that happens when something real is at stake and no one's scoring it. He knew some things. He knew how to take a hit without going down. He knew how to find a position of advantage from a position of disadvantage. He knew how to last. Flint wanted to end this. Not cruelly. The opposite. He wanted to end it as quickly as possible to spare Gus further punishment, which was the same generous impulse that made it the wrong strategy. Because Gus didn't want to be spared. Gus wanted to last. So every time Flint pressed, Gus gave ground. Not retreating, just not fighting the force. Moving with it, redirecting. Making Flint work for every inch of progress. The sun climbed, 20 minutes became 40. Became an hour. Gus's ankle was screaming. A low, constant, comprehensive scream that he had moved to the background of his attention the way you move a loud neighbor to the background. Not ignoring it exactly, just choosing not to let it drive. His ribs had taken 3 hits. None broken, probably. Possibly 1 cracked. He'd know tomorrow. His left eye was swelling from something Flint's forearms done at the 53rd minute that Gus hadn't quite avoided. Flint was breathing hard, heavy, the kind of breathing that meant his reserves were getting thin. He was stronger than Gus, and faster than Gus, and 27 years old. But he'd been spending freely, and Gus had been spending carefully, and the math of that was starting to show. 90 minutes, nearly. Both of them were still standing, barely. Gus's legs had crossed some threshold into numbness that he was distantly grateful for, because the alternative was feeling them. Flint had one eye partially swollen. Gus had gotten 1 good shot in around the 40-minute mark and was moving differently than he had at the start. Still controlled, still precise. But deliberate in a way that meant deliberate was now necessary where it had once been automatic. They stood across from each other, both breathing, both not stopping, the crowd around them. The whole camp, basically, everyone, including the children who'd climbed onto rocks to see, was absolutely silent. Not the dramatic silence of people holding their breath. The genuine silence of people who don't quite know what they're witnessing and are not sure whether to call it. Flint looked at Gus. Gus looked back. And something happened in that look. Something that had nothing to do with the trial. Something that had been building for 4 days and had arrived in this moment without announcement. Understanding. Not agreement about everything. Not friendship, not yet. But understanding. The kind that doesn't need explaining. They moved toward each other, and both of their legs gave out at approximately the same moment. Gus went down on one knee. Then the other. Flint went down on one knee. They were about 3 feet apart, both still upright, technically. Mostly. Neither moving toward the other, neither moving away. The elder's voice, neither man has yielded. Broken Antler spoke, long. The elder translated in pieces. He says this is the first time in his memory that a trial of endurance has ended without a winner. He says both men are still standing. A pause. He says standing is enough. He says the trials are complete. Flint extended his hand. His arm was shaking. Just slightly. From effort, from exhaustion, from everything the last 90 minutes had cost him. Gus took it. Their hands locked, not a shake. More like a hold, a mutual steadying. Two men keeping each other upright by deciding to. The camp made noise, not wild, not a celebration. Something more genuine than that. The sound people make when something they hoped might happen, actually. Gus looked up. Broken Antler stood at the edge of the combat ground, and on his face, not a smile. Something older and quieter than a smile. The look of a man who has seen enough of life to know when something real has just happened. He looked at Gus. He looked at Flint. Then he walked away toward his tent. Flint helped Gus to his feet. Or possibly they helped each other. The distinction felt unimportant. Tomorrow, Flint said. Still out of breath, the council. You speak. Tomorrow, Gus agreed. Tonight, Flint said. Sarah wants you to have supper with us. Gus blinked. With the family. Flint's expression was carefully neutral. My uncle's family, her family. A pause. Which may also be yours, stood there in the late afternoon light, looked at the camp. At the fires being built for evening. At the children who had climbed down from their rocks, and were now doing what children did. Running, yelling, completely unaware of or completely uninterested in the gravity of adult moments. He thought about Jacob Calloway. Old, complicated, cowardly, brave in other ways Jacob, who had sealed a water source with his own hands and carved his name into the rock beside it and stuffed his confession in oilskin in a saddlebag, and somehow, contrived for that bag to end up here, in this moment in the hands of someone who might do something with it. Maybe you did arrange it, Gus thought. You impossible old man. He looked at time, he said. Flint almost smiled. Sunset, he walked away. Gus limped toward the water source, sat down at the edge of it, put his swollen ankle in the cold water, looked at the carved letters on the rock face. J. Calloway, 1847. I'm still here, he said to the letters, to Jacob, to whoever was listening. I'm staying. The water was cold, and constant, and old as the desert itself. Gus sat with it until the sun started going down. Supper with the family was not what Gus expected, which was fair. He hadn't known what to expect. He'd spent 20 minutes before sunset sitting at the water source, trying to prepare himself for something he had no framework for. A meal with the man who might be his half-uncle, the woman who had read his grandfather's confession and said nothing except, "There is no right moment. You decide." He'd shown up at the fire with his hat in his hands, literally, hat in hands. Because Eleanor had drilled that into him from the first year of their marriage. And some things stayed even when the person who taught them didn't. Broken Antler was already there. Sitting on the far side of the fire, still and composed and giving nothing away in his face, which Gus was coming to understand was not coldness. It was just how the man was. Still water that ran very deep. Sarah was cooking something. She did not look up when Gus arrived, but she pointed at the ground across from her father. Sit, she said. So he sat. Flint arrived a minute later, dropped down beside Sarah without ceremony. Their shoulders touched. Neither of them acknowledged it. Acknowledged the way people don't acknowledge things that are simply true. The four of them ate. Nobody talked for a while, which should have been uncomfortable, and wasn't. The fire did what fires do. It gave everyone something neutral to look at. The food was good. Dried meat and something grain-based and flatbread that Gus didn't ask about and didn't need to. Broken Antler spoke. In Apache. Not looking at anyone specifically, Sarah translated quietly, not translating as she went. She waited until he finished. He says when he was a boy, his mother told him his father was a spirit, not a man. A spirit who came from the east and stayed one winter and left because spirits cannot live in the world forever. She said this to protect him from something she thought would hurt him more than not knowing. Sarah paused. He says he believed her until he was old enough to understand that she was protecting him, and then he stopped asking. Because some questions, once you stop asking them, become part of the shape of who you are. Gus held the journal pages in his pocket. Had been holding them all evening, he said. She wasn't wrong, to protect him. Sarah translated. Broken Antler looked at the fire, spoke again. He says, but the truth has a way. It finds the shape of things and it fills in. A pause. He says he has seen you for 4 days. He has watched how you move through things, and he thinks his mother's spirit was not a spirit. He thinks his mother's spirit had a name. The fire crackled. Gus took the journal pages out of his pocket. He held them across the fire. Broken Antler looked at them. Didn't take them yet. Sarah will read it to you, Gus said. If that's all right. It should come from family. Something moved across Broken Antler's face fast. Gone before it fully arrived, he nodded. Sarah took the pages. She read slowly, in Apache. She translated as she went, her voice low and even. Gus didn't understand the words, but he understood the rhythm of them. The pauses she took, the places where her voice thinned, and she had to stop and breathe before continuing. Broken Antler listened. He did not move, not once. Not a shift of weight, not a hand moved, not a change in breathing that Gus could see. Just listening. The way he'd listened to everything, completely. Like the world owed him nothing, and he was going to hear it all the way through anyway. When Sarah finished, she folded the pages carefully, put them in her lap, the fire, the night sounds. Somewhere distant, a child's voice, quickly hushed. Nobody said anything for a long time. Then Broken Antler spoke. One sentence. Flint translated this time. His voice even. Careful, he says. So he knew, yes, Gus said. He knew. Another sentence from Broken Antler, he says. And he sealed the water anyway? A long pause. Broken Antler looked up from the fire, looked directly at Gus. Full on. The way he'd looked at him that first day in the desert measuring. Except now measuring something different. He spoke. Longer this time. Flint and Sarah both listened. Flint translated. He says a man can be two things. He can do a wrong and also do a right, and both are true. He says your grandfather left. That is one truth. He also sealed this water and marked it, and, somehow, made sure it would be found. That is another truth. He says he has spent a lot of years only having the first kind of truth about his father. He thinks having both kinds is heavy, but better. Gus nodded. He didn't have words. Some moments don't need words from the outside. They have enough of their own. Broken Antler stood. He was not a demonstrative man. Gus had established this. He didn't reach for Gus's hand, didn't embrace him, didn't perform the moment. He simply stood, looked down at Gus for one long second. Then he placed his hand on Gus's shoulder, pressed once, and walked away toward his tent. Sarah watched him go, her eyes bright with something she was not letting fall. Flint put his arm around her. She leaned against him. Just slightly. Just enough. Gus looked at the fire. Felt, in his chest, something that had been sealed for a long time. Not quite as long as the water source, but long enough begin to fill. He didn't sleep that night either, but this time it wasn't bad. This time he lay on his back with his arms behind his head and looked at the stars and thought about everything. Jacob, Eleanor, the ranch, the road that had brought him here and all the smaller roads inside that road. The choices that look like accidents until you look at them from the right angle and realize they were pointing somewhere the whole time. You always end up where you're supposed to be, Eleanor had said once. That sounds like nonsense, he'd said. Most true things do, he almost laughed. Out loud, alone in the desert. 62 years old with a swollen ankle and cracked ribs and a face that had taken better weeks. But he almost laughed, which was something, which was maybe everything. Morning came gold and clean. The council was set for midday. Gus had been told the night before by the elder, after the supper, after Broken Antler had gone to his tent, after Sarah and Flint had sat with Gus for another quiet hour that felt like a gift. That midday was when decisions were made, when the sun was highest, when there were no shadows to hide in, which Gus appreciated as a philosophy. He spent the morning at the water source. Writing, actually. Not in a journal, he didn't keep one. On a folded piece of paper from his saddlebag, with the stub of pencil, he kept there for tallying fence posts and supply counts. He sat at the water's edge with the paper on his knee and wrote until it was right. The pencil stub was nearly gone. He didn't rush. The council gathered at midday, the whole camp again. Because some things are everyone's business, and the community knows it without being told. Broken Antler, the 6 elders, the warriors, the women, the children in the back, running quiet interference with each other, aware without being told that something important was happening. Flint stood to the left, arms at his sides, not crossed, which was new. Sarah stood near her father. She had the journal pages in her hand. She'd asked the night before if she could keep them. Gus had said yes without hesitating. Gus stood in the center, hat in hand. Again, Eleanor's rule. Some things stay. The elder who translated, Gus Calloway. The trials are complete. The council recognizes your worth. You have earned the right to propose your own settlement of the debt. Speak. Gus looked at the piece of paper in his hand. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket, because he knew it now. He'd written it out to know it. But he didn't need to read it. He looked at Broken Antler. I don't want wives, he said. Clear, no preamble. Not 1. Not 22. That's not a settlement. That's 22 people having their lives decided without their consent. And that's not what I want my name attached to. The elder translated. A murmur from the council. One of the older elders spoke. Something sharp. The elder relayed. He says, then what do you want? I want 3 things. He held up one finger. First, the land surrounding this water source. 20 acres, maybe 30. I want it protected. Not claimed. Not owned. Protected, no government survey. No cattle company coming in with wire and posts. I know some people in the territorial administration. People who owe me quieter favors than that. I can make sure this specific stretch of land stays off the record for long enough that he stopped. Long enough. The elder translated. Broken Antler listened. Said nothing yet. Second finger second. I want a trading post built here. Small, honest, where your people can bring what you make. The beadwork, the pottery, the blankets, the things that should be worth more than they get paid for them in town, and trade them with merchants. I'll bring merchants who will deal fairly because I will personally make their lives difficult if they don't. More murmuring. Different in tone now, less skeptical. Third finger third. He looked at Sarah, then at Flint, then back at Broken Antler. Sarah makes her own choice about her own life. No debt involves her. No transaction includes her. Whatever she decides, whoever she decides, whenever she decides, that's hers. He put his hand down. That's my proposal. Silence. Then Broken Antler spoke. Long. The elder started to translate, but Broken Antler held up and wait and spoke more. The elder listened, took it in. Waited for the end. Then, he says the first request is wise, and he had already thought about the water source himself. He says the second request is either the idea of a very smart man or a very foolish one, and he has not yet decided which. He says the third. The elder paused, something almost like a smile. He says regarding the third, his daughter has not waited for permission for anything since she was 4 years old. He says this is not news to anyone in this camp. He says you are perhaps the first outsider to have noticed. Gus looked at Sarah. Sarah was looking at her father with an expression that contained multitudes. Broken Antler spoke again. Short this time, he says, accepted. And that was that. Except it wasn't, because 20 minutes later, when the council had dispersed and people were going back to the ordinary business of a day, a sound arrived from the north horses, multiple horses, moving at a pace that meant intention. That meant destination. The camp went still, that specific stillness again. The held breath kind. Gus was on his feet before he thought about it. Ankle, protesting, not caring. He counted the riders as they came over the low ridge north of camp, 4 men, riding in a loose group. Government horses. You could tell by the tack, the uniformity. 3 of them young enough to be following orders without too much thinking. The 4th one older, 47, maybe 50. Solid build going to weight. A face that had started out hard and stayed that way through different reasons. The kind of face that had written a lot of papers and served a lot of orders and told itself it was just doing its job for so long that it had almost stopped asking what the job was for. Deputy Marshal Aldous Greer. He pulled up at the edge of camp, looked around, took in the water source, the tents, the number of people, 41 individuals in all their various states of recovery. Then he found Gus. Calloway, he said. Greer. They looked at each other. Gus had known Aldous Greer for 15 years. Not well, not badly. The way men know each other in territories this size, by reputation first, then by occasional encounter, then by the accumulation of small interactions that build into something like a catalog. You knew what a man would do. Mostly. Greer reached into his coat, pulled out folded papers. I have a relocation order, he said. Territorial government. These people are supposed to be at the northern settlement by. I know what the order says, then you know I have to. Greer. The older man stopped. Gus walked toward him. Slowly. The ankle. The ribs. The eye that was still partially closed. He was aware. He looked like something that had been put through several processes. He did not particularly care. He stopped at Greer's horse, looked up at the man. How long have you been riding? Greer blinked. What? How long today? How long since before dawn? What is that? Get down, Gus said. I'll get you coffee. Calloway, I have a legal order. I know you have a legal order. Get down, have coffee. Then we'll talk about the legal order. A pause. Greer looked past Gus at the camp, at the people, at the children who were watching from a safe distance with the wariness of children who have learned that strangers on government horses often meant something bad. Something shifted in his face. He got down. They sat at Gus's fire, which was not exactly a neutral location, given that it was in the middle of the Apache camp. But Greer sat down without objecting. He took the coffee. He drank it. His 3 younger men waited with the horses at the camp's edge. Flint stood about 40 feet away. Not close enough to be threatening, not far enough to miss anything. How did you find them? Gus said. Informant in Silverton. Said a group had been seen heading south toward the Eagle Formation. Who? Who? Doesn't matter. It might matter. It doesn't matter for what we're talking about right now. Greer turned the coffee cup in his hands. I have an order, Gus. I'm not here to make trouble. I'm here because I was told to be here. I know. That distinction matters to me. I know it does. Gus looked at the fire. Greer, these people almost died. 4 days ago, they were 48 hours from gone. The kids, the old ones, they'd have been down within hours. I know the water they found. It's theirs. It was here before the territory was a territory. It's been here long enough that my grandfather sealed it in 1847, and it was old then. Greer looked at him. Your grandfather. It's a longer story. The short version. There's a carved name on the rock face right there, and it's Jacob Calloway's, and I have documents that explain what that means. Documents tapedoons, from a journal. Enough to establish a prior claim to this land that predates any territorial survey by 3 decades. Greer was quiet. He was not a stupid man. That was the thing about Greer. He was a man who had made peace with a certain kind of complicity, following orders, without asking too often whether the orders were right, but he was not stupid. And when something was put clearly in front of him, he could see it. A prior claim, he said slowly, family connection to this land, going back to 1847. An established water source with documented history. 20 acres that could be argued, very credibly, to fall outside the boundaries of the relocation territory, if someone with the right legal background looked at the survey maps carefully enough. You know someone with the right legal background. I know several. Greer turned the cup again. This would take time, he said. Challenges like that take. I know how long they take. Gus looked at him. I'm asking for a different question. I'm asking, do you need to file that order today? Silence, regulations say. I know what regulations say. I'm asking what you need to do today. Another silence longer. Greer looked at the camp, at the fires, at the woman grinding something near the largest tent, at two small boys who had gotten tired of watching adults and were now quietly hitting each other with sticks in the background, as small boys do, at the carved letters on the rock face. J. Calloway, 1847. He was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his coat again, pulled out the folded order, looked at it, put it on the ground next to the fire. I camp here tonight, he said. I leave in the morning. I report that I found no group matching the description in this location. He looked at Gus. I am doing this because the survey maps are genuinely ambiguous in this sector, and a legal challenge would be legitimate, and I am not interested in spending 2 years in territorial court. Of course, Gus said. Not for any other reason, naturally. I am a man who follows the law. Absolutely, the law in this case is genuinely unclear. Very unclear, Gus agreed. Greer picked up his coffee, drank. You look terrible, he said. Snakebite. When? 2 nights ago. And you're fine. You're not fine. Fine enough. Greer looked at him for a moment. Then he shook his head. The head shake of a man who has known another man long enough to have stopped being surprised by him. I'll need that coffee to be stronger than this tomorrow morning, he said. I'll see what I can do, Gus said. Greer's men set up camp at the north edge, not inside the camp. Not outside it exactly, that ambiguous middle distance that said, present but not claiming anything. Flint watched this happen. Came to stand near Gus after. He is leaving, Flint said. Statement, not question. Tomorrow morning. And the order will not be filed in a way that causes problems. For now, Flint looked at him, for now. It's the best now can do, Gus said. Now is always the best now can do. The rest you build from there. Flint was quiet then. My uncle wants to speak with you. Before the evening. When now, I think. Broken Antler's tent, same as before, low light. Smoke from the clay bowls. But smaller this time, just the two of them. No elders, no council, no translator. Except that Sarah came and sat at the edge and offered herself quietly, without being asked. Broken Antler had the journal pages. He'd read them again, apparently, or had them read to him again. They were worn at the fold lines from handling. He spoke. Sarah translated. He says he thought about this all morning. He says he kept coming back to one thing. Not the leaving, he has made peace with that, or is making peace with it. He kept coming back to the water. Gus waited, he says, why seal it? A man who is leaving and not coming back, why seal the water and mark it? Why take that care for something you are never going to return to? Gus didn't answer. He didn't think the question was for him, Broken Antler continued. He says he thinks he knows why. He says he thinks Jacob Calloway did not know how to stay. But he also could not make himself leave completely. So he did what he could do. He made something that would last. He left something that could be found. He said, in the only language he had, I was here. Something I built is still here. Come and find it. Sarah's voice was steady. Impressively steady. He says this is not enough. He wants you to know he is not saying it is enough. But he says he understands it. And understanding is a beginning. Gus nodded. Tell him, Gus said, that Jacob was the best and worst parts of a person in the same body. I've spent 60 years trying to take the best and leave the rest. I don't always succeed. He paused. But I'm still trying, Sarah translated. Broken Antler listened. Then he said something short, Sarah. He says, "That is all anyone can do." They sat together for a while, saying nothing, which by now felt entirely natural. The wedding was Flint's idea. Or rather, it had apparently always been planned for when the tribe found stable ground again. It was not a rushed thing, not a reaction to the last 4 days. It was something that had been waiting for a moment of safety, and now there was a moment, and it was time. Broken Antler announced it at sunset. The camp organized itself in the way communities do when something is being celebrated. Everyone knowing their role without being assigned it. The older women gathering at specific fires. The younger ones preparing things Gus couldn't name. The children allowed to be louder than usual because loudness was appropriate tonight. Gus stood at the edge of it all and watched. He had the feeling of being in the right place at the right time, which had not been a frequent feeling in his life. He was enjoying it. Sarah found him there. She was dressed differently. The ceremony clothes, beaded and precise, things that had been carried through 3 weeks of desert somehow, because they were too important not to carry. Her hair arranged in a way that required help and care. Her face normally so composed, doing something complicated. "You're nervous," Gus said. "I am not nervous. You're nervous? I have been waiting for this," for she stopped. "Yes, slightly nervous." "Good," Gus said. "It means it matters." She looked at him. "Will you stand with us?" she said. During the ceremony. As family, the word landed quietly. Family. "Yes," Gus said. "I will." She nodded, straightened, composed herself back into the version of herself that composed, walked back toward the fires. Gus watched her go. "Eleanor," he thought. "You would have liked her," Eleanor said back clearly, and without hesitation. "She reminds me of me. She's nothing like you. She's exactly like me. You just can't see it because she looks different." "That is true, Gus. That is true, and you know it." He almost smiled, fully this time. The ceremony happened at the water source, which felt right. Which felt like the only place it could have happened. The full moon was up. Not quite full, one night off, but close enough that the desert was lit silver and blue, the rock faces glowing softly, the water catching the light and holding it the way water does. The community gathered in a loose circle. The elders at the inner ring, the others behind. Children in the front, because children always find the front. Broken Antler stood at the water's edge. Gus stood beside him. They did not discuss this arrangement. It simply happened. Broken Antler moved to his position and Gus followed, and they stood together looking at the ceremony space. And it was, somehow, entirely natural that they should be standing in the same place at the same time for the same reason. Flint came first. He was different, not in an unrecognizable way. Just, the anger was somewhere else tonight. It would never be entirely gone. The world had given him too many reasons for it. But set aside, deliberately. For this he stood straight. He looked. Gus searched for the word glad. The careful, serious, won't take it for granted kind of glad. Then Sarah, and whatever the ceremony was, whatever the words meant, whatever the rituals signified, all of which Gus observed with attention and ignorance in approximately equal measure. The part that needed no translation was the way they looked at each other when they came face to face. Like they'd been waiting for a very long time. Like this moment was the one all the other moments had been pointing toward. Broken Antler spoke, his voice resonant and low, the words ancient. Gus didn't understand any of them. He understood all of them. He stood beside the half-brother he'd met 5 days ago, at the water his grandfather had sealed 37 years before. Under Arizona stars that had been doing exactly this. Watching people try to find each other across impossible distances, for longer than anyone could remember. He stayed present for all of it. Later, much later, the fires down to coals. The camp settling into the deep quiet that follows celebration. Children already asleep. Adults moving slowly toward rest. Greer appeared at Gus's fire. Not aggressive, just present. The way a man who has something to say appears, he sat down. I read the journal, he said. Gus looked at him. When tonight? While the ceremony was happening. Sarah brought it to me. Said I should read it before I filed anything. Gus waited. I read the whole thing, Greer said. Jacob Calloway's account. He turned his cup in his hands. Prior claim is real, Gus. Any territorial lawyer who reads that document and looks at the survey maps for this sector, the argument is legitimate. This land has a documented connection to the Calloway name and to this specific band that predates the relocation order by decades. I know. I'm saying I know it too. Greer looked at him. Officially. Gus went still. What does that mean? It means that when I file my report tomorrow, I will note that I found no group in the designated relocation zone. I will also note that I observed a prior claim situation in an adjacent sector that requires legal review before any further orders are executed in this area. He paused. Legal review takes time. Sometimes a lot of time. Depending on workload, how much time? Could be years, Greer said. If the paperwork gets complicated, the paperwork tend to get complicated. In my experience, Greer said, whenever a situation involves legitimate historical documentation and competing jurisdictional claims, the paperwork gets very complicated indeed. They looked at each other. Greer, you didn't have to do this. I know. Why? The older man was quiet for a moment. Because I have been doing my job for 23 years, he said. And sometimes doing your job means doing it carefully. Looking at the details. Making sure the documentation supports the action before you take it. He set down the cup. That's not mercy. That's just proper procedure. Of course. I am a man of proper procedure. Absolutely. Greer stood up. Leave the coffee out in the morning, he said. I meant what I said about it being stronger. I'll see what I can do. He walked back toward his camp, and Gus sat there at his fire, in the Apache camp, at the water source that Jacob had sealed in 1847, and marked with his name, and somehow, impossibly, arranged to be found by the right person at the right time. He thought about the ranch, not the selling of it, not the end of it, the beginning of it, Jacob building it with his own hands. Young then, ambitious then, a man who had done something wrong and spent the rest of his life trying to balance the ledger without ever quite knowing how, and had ended up here, through Gus, through a saddlebag that had been passed down and never replaced, through an 11-day ride that Gus had framed to himself as an ending when it was, apparently, no such thing. You impossible, old man, he said quietly. You absolutely arranged this. The fire gave no answer. Some things don't need one. He wrote the paper in the morning, before Greer left, before breakfast even. He wrote it by the first light, sitting at the water source, with the paper on his knee and the pencil stub worn down to almost nothing. It was a property transfer document. Simple as he could make it. He wasn't a lawyer, and he didn't pretend to be one, but he knew enough from 40 years of ranch ownership, deeds and transfers, and the language of land changing hands, to put something on paper that meant what he wanted it to mean, 30 acres. The 20 surrounding the water source, and 10 more to the east, to the valley, where he'd found the white deer, which felt right. Which felt like it should be included, the land to be held by Broken Antlers community and their descendants, not transferred, not given. Returned, that was the word he used. Returned, because it was more accurate. He brought it to Broken Antlers' tent. Sarah translated as Gus explained what the paper said. Broken Antler listened. Then he looked at the paper for a long time. He said something. He says, Sarah translated, this paper means nothing without it being recognized. I know, Gus said. Greer will witness it. That makes it official enough to challenge anyone who tries to move on this land before the legal situation is settled, and Greer is going to make sure the legal situation takes a long time to settle. Broken Antler looked at him. Why? Because Gus said, it's the right thing to do. And because Jacob Calloway owed a debt, and I'm the one who can pay part of it. Broken Antler was quiet. Then he spoke at length. Sarah translated slowly, taking care. He says, "You carry your grandfather's best and leave his worst." He says this is what family is supposed to do. Take what was broken and try to build something that works. He says he has been angry for a long time at an absence that had no face. He says now the absence has a story, and a face, and a great nephew who is stubborn as the red rock and twice as hard to move. She paused. He says this is a compliment. Tell him I take it as one, Gus said. She told him. Broken Antler almost smiled. Not quite, but close. They both signed the paper. Gus first, then Broken Antler. With his mark careful and deliberate, Greer witnessed it before he mounted up. He looked at the signed paper, folded it, gave it to Gus. "You keep it," he said. "Safer with you. That's don't argue with me about document storage, Calloway." "I wasn't. You were about to." "He was a little bit." "Fine," Gus said. Greer mounted up. His 3 men gathered. They formed up at the north edge of camp. He looked down at Gus. "The coffee was better this morning." "I had help," Gus said. "Sarah knows things about coffee I don't. She knows things about everything you don't. This has been established." Greer looked at the camp. One long last look at the water source, at the carved letters, at the families moving through their mourning. He tipped his hat, then he rode north and didn't look back. Which was the dignified way to do it. Gus appreciated that. He found Flint at the water source an hour later. Flint was sitting at the edge of it, watching the water move, the way water moves when it's finding its level. Constant, patient, working through every available space without drama. He looked up when Gus sat down. They didn't say anything immediately. They'd learned by now that silence between them didn't need filling. "What happens now?" Flint said eventually. "For you. For you." Gus looked at the water. "I'm going back to the ranch." Flint looked at him. "I thought you were selling it." "I was." Gus was quiet for a moment. "There are things that need to be kept. Things that are worth keeping." "I think I confused ending with finishing." "They're not the same." "No," Flint said. "They're not." And Gus said, "Someone needs to be the connection. Between here and the people who can help with the legal situation. Between this community and the merchants who would deal fairly." He paused. "That's work that needs doing. Somebody's got to do it, and you're choosing to be that person." "I'm just acknowledging it." Flint looked at the water. "You will come back." "Not a question." "Yes." "When?" "When things need doing. When I can help." "When?" He stopped. When its tent nodded. They sat together for a while longer. "Flint, last night, at the ceremony, you looked—" Gus searched for the right word. "Happy. You looked happy." Flint was quiet for a moment. "Then I have been angry for a long time. At soldiers, at systems, at people who—" He stopped. "I will probably always be angry. There are things worth being angry about. I am not going to pretend otherwise, I know. But anger is not all I am." He looked at his hands. "I forgot that? For a while. I forgot that I was also other things." "Her," he said. Simply. Just her. "She remembers what I am when I forget." Gus nodded, he said. "Is the best possible thing." Flint looked at him. "Your wife," he said. "Eleanor, yes, she did that for you." It wasn't a question, but Gus answered it. "Every day," he said. "For 31 years, Flint nodded. They both looked at the water. "I am sorry she is gone," Flint said. 2 words per sentence and every one of them exact. "Thank you," Gus said. Which was also exact. He saw Decker after lunch, not rushed. The way he'd done it 10,000 times. Checking the cinch twice. Adjusting the saddlebags. The old bag on the left. Jacob's bag. Now carrying the transfer document. And the journal pages which Sarah had returned to him that morning, wrapped in fresh oilskin. For keeping, she'd said. "They're yours," he'd said. "They're your family's. They're your family too," she'd said. "And you have a safe place for them." "We are." She'd looked around at the camp, at the desert, at the ongoing situation of being Apache in 1884. "We are not always safe." He'd taken them. The camp watched him prepare to leave. Not formally, not gathered. Just present. People going about their business, but aware. The way a community is aware of something. Broken Antler came to stand near Decker. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he placed something in Gus's hand. Stone, small, smooth, dark red with a vein of white running through it. Polished by years of handling, the shine of a thing that's been carried a long time. His mother's, Sarah, said quietly from behind Gus. He has kept it since she died. Gus looked at Broken Antler. He didn't have words. He didn't try to find them. He closed his fist around the stone, pressed his fist once to his chest. Broken Antler looked at him. Then he raised his right hand, shoulder height, palm out. The same gesture he'd given Gus's grandfather, maybe, in another life. Or the gesture he'd never been able to give. Or the gesture that was both. The one Jacob should have received. Offered now to the person who had come in his place and done better. Gus saw all of what it meant. All the weight of it. He raised his own hand. They held that for a moment. Then Gus turned and mounted up. One look back, just one, the camp, the water, the carved name on the rock face, the eagle formations against the sky, Sarah and Flint at the edge, her hand in his broken antler, behind them, still, watching. Gus held it for a moment. Then he faced north and let Decker walk. The old horse moved beneath him like he'd been waiting all week for this. Easy. Sure. Going home, which he had feelings about. After a while, when the camp had gone behind the horizon, he reached into his pocket, took out the stone. Small, red, the white vein running through it like a signature. He held it in his palm, let the sun warm it, put it back in his pocket, kept riding not toward an ending, toward whatever came next, which was, it turned out, enough, more than enough. The water ran on behind him, cold and clear and constant, the way it had been running for 10,000 years beneath the desert floor. Waiting for someone to take the stones away, not stopping, not ever stopping, just finding its way through the way things do when you let them.